Hi, Natalie here, and today we're going to talk photosynthesis, energy, and the carbon cycle. All right. So, potential energy, which is energy that could potentially be used, is stored in bonds that hold atoms together into molecules. So there is energy in each one of us. There's energy in food, there's energy in trees, there's energy in wood. And in addition, there's a specific type of molecule that utilizes potential energy to release energy in each of us. So ATP is a common energy currency that life uses, and it is called adenosine triphosphate, and you can see a picture of it down here. So 1, 2, 3 phosphate groups in an adenosine group. And through a chemical reaction, one phosphate group is popped off the back of it. And when that occurs, and it turns from ATP to ADP, and is adenosine diphosphate, then energy is released. Now, it takes energy to take ADP, add a phosphate group, and make it into ATP. And it releases energy to take ATP, pull the phosphate group off, and make ADP. And this conversion back and forth between ATP and ADP is what runs life on Earth. So let's learn a few things first, and then eventually we'll get to the point where we'll learn how ATP is created in our bodies. Okay, so some physics definitions that we need to know of. So energy cannot be converted, energy can be converted but cannot be created or destroyed. This is the conservation of energy law. So what this means is that we may see that this lizard converts solar energy into other things, or converts chemical energy from its food into movement. So that's been a conversion of energy, but the amount of energy in the planet doesn't change. Now, at each, I'll get to this. So at each time that something converts from one form of energy to the next, there generally is waste energy, which is heat. But that waste energy plus the utilized energy and the converted energy, that all adds together to make the original amount of energy. So the law of entropy describes this, that in every transformation, some energy is converted from a higher quality energy or more usable energy to a lower quality or less usable energy. And generally, when we say this, we're referring to heat, but we can be referring to a lot of different things. So for example, this tree is going to utilize solar energy to grow, but it's going to create heat as a result of growing and doing its normal chemical reactions, and that's going to be wasted into the environment. So not all the solar energy that it brings in is going to be used. Some of it will be created into heat and wasted. And so each time this tree makes apples, or Bob comes along here and eats an apple, or Bob comes along, eats an apple, utilizes the apple energy to dig holes, all of this process, we're going to have wasted heat, and that is what entropy is. Okay, so energy will flow through an ecosystem where solar energy is inputted daily, but then energy moves from one part to the next, so from a plant to an animal to a decomposer. And so there's always this flow from one organism to the next. But ultimately, the first source of energy on Earth is generally the sun. We have a few exceptions like solar, or like hydrothermal vents in the ocean floor, but for the most part, the sun is where we're getting the energy. And we've got this cycle from our photosynthetic organisms, or our chloroplasts within our plants, to our mitochondria within our plants, or from plants to animals. Okay, So the things that we may consider plants from an ecological perspective is pretty broad. Basically anything that produces sugars using the sun's energy. So anything that does photosynthesis. So land plants would be the obvious, like this is definitely a producer, definitely a photosynthesizer. But we also have aquatic algae that contain chloroplasts but aren't yet considered land plants. They don't have all the definitions that would make them a land plant. And then we also even have photosynthetic bacteria, cyanobacteria, and such, all of whom do photosynthesis. So we have a larger category for things that do photosynthesis called producers, that includes both plants and the other things that photosynthesize. So they can absorb the sun's energy and convert it to make chemical energy. So in other words, they can make their own food. There are some really cool outliers within producers, like a sea slug that has algae in it. So a sea slug that does not need to actually eat. So an animal can be in this group as well, but there are very few photosynthesizing animals. All right. Consumers, on the other hand, are a different group. So consumers are things that eat either plants or other animals or dead things. They cannot use the sun's light or other sources of energy that are chemical, that aren't life first for living. So what we're looking at here are things like caterpillars, elephants, humans, fungi, amoebas. They eat other living things or other recently dead or very dead things. So, producers and consumers form a cycle where producers utilize solar energy to feed the planet. Consumers then eat the plants and each other. Decomposers eat both the dead plants and the dead animals. And then those decomposers release the chemical nutrients back into the ecosystems, generally into the soil or the water or the air. And then the producers take up those nutrients again. So this would be a good thing to draw in your notes. If you haven't been taking notes so far, it would be a good idea to pause it here and make notes of this. Okay, so photosynthesis is an equation that we've seen before. The definition of photosynthesis is that it's a process by which plants, algae, and some bacteria transform light energy to chemical energy stored in the bonds of sugars. And in order for photosynthesis to occur, we need 6 carbon dioxides, 6 water, or equivalent amounts of water and carbon dioxide. We need some light energy, and then we can convert that into 1 glucose molecule, C6H12O6 is a glucose molecule, and 6 oxygen molecules. Okay, so here's another way that we can look at this. So water is what is inputted in photosynthesis, and it travels up through the root hairs, through the stems, to the leaves where the chloroplasts live. And then we have stomata on the underside of the leaves. These are little pores that let gas exchange, and we can get our carbon dioxide through the stomata, and then that can travel to the chloroplast where photosynthesis occurs. Okay, so now we've got our water and our carbon dioxide that are in the right place in the chloroplast. And then in the thylakoid membranes, we're going to have a series of chemical reactions that then can produce sugar and oxygen as a byproduct. So oxygen is actually a waste product, and an interesting thing is that previous to plants, oxygen quantities in the atmosphere were quite low, and oxygen is an oxidizer, so it was an enormous adjustment for life on Earth once plants started to take off, because the amount of oxygen in the atmosphere increased to the point where a lot of life was impacted negatively. There was a huge amount of extinction that occurred as plants were starting to take hold, because of the huge amount of oxidation stripping electrons from organisms. organisms had to totally rework how they created their bodies. And so there was a lot of extinction as a result of plants. Okay, so here's a question for you. Why is the grass green? So why do most of the plants that we see every day look green or greenish to us? So if you know, great. If you don't, maybe pause this and guess in your notes. Okay, so chlorophyll is a pigment, or what we call a light-absorbing molecule that's in the chloroplast that makes it green. And the light in the blue and violet wavelengths and orange and red wavelengths are absorbed. And then chlorophyll actually doesn't use the green-yellow wavelengths. And so that is the only light that's reflected. So when we're talking light instead of like painting, when we're talking the pigments in light, the reflected light or the unused light is what we actually see, whereas the used light is what we don't see. So here are a couple of different pigment colors that we can find in many plants. And plants may have carotenoids, chlorophyll B and chlorophyll A, all three of them. They may have two of them in different quantities. Every plant is different, which is what causes the different shades of green in the world. But chlorophyll A, for example, will absorb these wavelengths in the low 400s and in the 700s, but then it'll reflect these wavelengths, which causes it to be a dark green color. And then carotenoids will absorb in the 4 and 500s and nowhere else, which causes them to be kind of a yellowy color. And then our chlorophyll B will absorb in all of the 400s, peaking in the late 400s, and then also again in the late 600s, and then reflect back these 5 to 650s, which causes it to be a light green. So isn't that cool? All right, so photosynthesis is broken into two different stages. We have our light reactions and we have our Calvin cycle, which is our light independent reactions. And our Calvin cycle can actually occur at night, whereas our light reactions need to happen during the day. So with our light reactions, the light energy is converted to chemical energy. And then with our light independent reactions, we're using high energy molecules like ATP that were converted in or made in a light reaction to produce sugar. And so this Calvin cycle will be occurring while the light reaction is occurring during the day. But if there's any leftovers, it can continue to occur at night until they run out. All right, so here's a little diagram of photosynthesis. You don't have to memorize this process, but it's fun, so we'll go through it. So light comes in to our chloroplast. A molecule of chlorophyll, so one of these in this thylakoid stack, there's chlorophyll molecules. It'll absorb the sunlight and then shoot out an electron. So this electron just got shot out. And the electron eventually joins with one of these wonderful carrier molecules that it does a great job of shuttling electrons and protons back and forth. This one is called NADPH. So the electron goes boop and clicks right in there. Each electron transfer will release energy, and that energy release is used to take one ADP molecule and go and click on another phosphate group to make an ATP molecule. So we just made energy. That's pretty cool. And then we bring in carbon dioxide over here for the Calvin cycle. And we use that electron from the NADPH. And we use some energy. And we can then create a glucose molecule. So a glucose molecule has 6 carbons in a ring, and a carbon dioxide has just 1 carbon. So we need to have 6 of these carbon dioxide molecules come in, to make that one-ringed glucose molecule. Okay. So it's actually really cool how each of these thylakoid membranes are set up. And here's a diagram of the thylakoid membrane. So the thylakoid membrane is actually a phospholipid bilayer, and you've seen that before on the outside of cells. So it's exactly the same type of membrane, and embedded within it are proteins, just like our cell membranes have. But embedded within the protein are these individual chlorophyll molecules, which is those pigments that can absorb the energy from sunlight. Okay. So, oops, I'm gonna go back. So we'll go through in more detail. So we get water up from the roots for photosynthesis. And that water is H2O, so 2 hydrogens, 1 oxygen. That's going to be split up. The oxygen exits the leaf right away. So oxygen, as we know, is a gas, and the plant does not need it in this process. So boop, get rid of it. And then we, of course, breathe that in. And then these electrons here, so our hydrogens from our oxygen can further be split into proton and electron. And the electrons here can bop around in the photosynthesis system that has all these chlorophyll molecules. And they can be passed from one chlorophyll molecule to the next and sort of excite those chlorophyll molecules. Okay. So this is energy, and there's a chain that goes from one photosystem, one protein, to the next. And as this is occurring, enough energy can be created to bond together one ADP plus a phosphate group to make ATP. So this electron had a lot of energy, but it returns to its ground state at some point in time and doesn't have a whole lot of energy left. If more sunlight comes in, then that electron can be boosted to a high energy state from the energy from the sun, and that energy can then be used to generate a NADPH from NADP+, so we can add on that electron to this molecule, and then that molecule can go around and shuttle electrons into other places. Okay, so then the Calvin cycle will utilize this NADPH and the ATP, and it will make sugar as a result. So light reaction and then Calvin cycle, 2 different parts. And the Calvin cycle is the final part that makes the sugars. The sugars then get used in a variety of different ways. So cellulose, different types of starches, could just be metabolized to make more ATP molecules. So yeah, and then the Calvin cycle itself utilizes those ATPs, utilizes those NADPHs, but also utilizes a bunch of carbon dioxide. So those are the inputs to the Calvin cycle. Okay. So here's a question for you. Where does the mass of a plant come from? So tiny acorns will grow into huge oak trees, but where does all the mass of the adult oak tree come from? Does it come from water? Let's go back for a sec. Does it come from carbon dioxide? Does it come from oxygen? Does it come from, where do you think it comes from? So take a moment and think about this. So in reality, which is, this is kind of a hard thing to conceptualize, at least for me, the vast majority of a mass of a plant is carbon-based. So at least half the mass of a tree is carbon, and carbon is brought in from the plant from the air, right? From carbon dioxide. So I have a hard time wrapping my mind around this because carbon dioxide to me, I'm feeling it right now, it doesn't feel very heavy. And it only takes up a very small amount of of our atmosphere anyways. But but in a plant, you would think that the water would be making up a vast majority of the mass of a tree because water is so heavy, right? Um, but the water that the tree brings in is often converted into oxygen that's a waste product. The hydrogens will be used, but a tree gains most of its mass from the air. Who knew? Okay, so cellular respiration. Let's talk about this. This is a process that plants use and that animals use to take the energy that's stored in sugars and, with the help of oxygen, make ATP. So all organisms will use cellular respiration, plants and animals. So this is a process that utilizes sugar and oxygen, goes through a bunch of chemical reactions, and makes from it water and carbon dioxide. So this occurs in the mitochondria, and it can occur with the air, and parts of it can occur without air, so without oxygen. Okay, so let's go through the basics here. So cellular respiration requires that we put food in our mouths. We digest it, and that we breathe in oxygen. And we breathe out carbon dioxide. Okay, so then in our stomach, we will start to digest those sugars, and those sugars will go into our bloodstream. So our digestive system sends glucose into our cells by through our vascular system, through our bloodstream. And then our respiration and circulatory systems will send oxygen to our cells through our vascular system. So same highways. And then our mitochondria will send carbon dioxide back out of our body, through our vascular system, and then into our lungs, and then out our mouth and nose. I just said that. Okay. So, if cellular respiration burns sugars, can we get energy from other foods? The answer is yes, we absolutely can. We can process fats, carbohydrates, and proteins into cellular respiration. Carbohydrates are very easy because we can break them apart into sugars. So then that goes into the exact same pathway of cellular respiration that a normal sugar molecule goes through. Fats and proteins get added in different areas. So we can generate ATP from many different food inputs. We can switch throughout the year if we're getting more carbohydrates in the summer and maybe more fats and proteins during the winter. Our bodies are flexible. Okay. When it comes to calories, we have a hard time, or at least I have a hard time, maybe you don't, converting kilocalories to calories and all that. So here's how I keep this straight. The calories over here that are listed on nutrition facts are actually kilocalories. So that is 1,000 times a small c calorie. So when you see a big C here, that is a kilocalorie. 1,000 times a small c calorie. A small c calorie is just the amount of energy needed to raise the temperature of 1 teeny tiny gram of water by 1 degree Celsius. This is a unit of measure within physics, and we put it on all of our nutrition facts. And I would love it if they would just say kilocalories, because then I would not get so confused. But so in reality, the nutrition label is showing you how much it will take to raise the temperature of 100 grams of water by 1 degree Celsius, or 1,000. Okay, so a calorie can describe the amount of energy that is burned or the amount of energy that is consumed. So here's some examples. A hamburger has 557 calories. We could potentially utilize that amount of energy to walk for about 2.5 hours. One chocolate bar gives us about 220 calories. That's only going to get us about an hour of walking. And then an orange has a measly 45 calories. That's only going to get us 0.2 of an hour of walking. So, we have different foods that can produce different amounts of activity for us. And then weight gain and loss is just a very simple balance of, calories in versus calories out. If you have more coming in and less going out, then you are going to get larger. If you have, more more calories going out and less coming in, then you're going to get smaller. And ideally, we would match, our food intake with our activity, so we are getting neither smaller nor larger. Okay, so ATP then is an energy storage molecule. And we're going to make it through cellular respiration. So we're going to take that exact photosynthesis equation. We're going to turn it on its head. We're going to take glucose, C6H12O6, plus oxygen, CO2. And we're going to make 6 carbon dioxides and 6 waters, plus we're going to make some ATP. So cellular respiration happens 24 hours a day, every second, every cell of every body of plant and animal. Cellular respiration is incredibly important, happens all the time. So it has 3 steps: glycolysis, the citric acid cycle, and the electron transport chain. And what occurs is that the sugar from food gets brought in, and in glycolysis, that sugar is split in half into 2 things that we call pyruvic acids, but it's a 3-carbon molecule. And then we're going to go through the citric acid cycle, and we're going to get rid of some elements of that pyruvic acid, and carbon dioxide will be released at that point in time. And then we'll go through the electron transport chain after that. So citric acid cycle releases carbon dioxide back out of the body. The electron transport chain releases water back out of the body, and we can see H's here, a lot of those that we're not going to use, and a lot of O's that we're not going to use. So we're expelling a lot of them. Okay. And then as we go through the electron transport chain, we're going to make a ton of ATP from ADPs. So that's our energy. Our glycolysis might only make 2 ATP. The citric acid cycle may only make 2 ATP. But then the electron transport chain makes a whole ton, 34 ATP. However, notice that oxygen is used for the electron transport chain. So if we want to be have a lot of output when it comes to speed, exercise, etc., we have to be breathing. It's this funny thing. So ATP then occurs mostly in the electron transport chain, but before this, in the citric acid cycle and glycolysis, we can actually do a few processes and make a little bit of energy, just not that much. And when that occurs, that can occur without oxygen present. The electron transport chain is super fascinating. What ends up happening is that we have these molecules here, NADH and FADH2, that bring, they're really good at carrying electrons and extra electrons and proteins around, electrons and protons around. So these are positive and negatively charged items, very good at transporting them. And so when NADH and FADH2 come along to the electron transport chain, which is located in one of the internal membranes of our mitochondria, it will give one of these proteins here that's embedded in the double phospholipid bilayer. It will give them an electron, and a proton will also pop off as well. So electron and proton get popped off of the NADH, and the proton gets pumped all the way through, and the electron gets traded from one protein to the next to the next. So this electron is going to follow this path of this black arrow all the way through. And while that's happening, hydrogen or protons, right, are being pumped through this way, And then we have a whole ton of positively charged space here in the intermembrane space. And as the electron comes back through this way, we can actually utilize that electron plus a few extra protons and maybe some oxygen that we breathed in to make some water. But then all the hydrogens are stuck out here, making a positively charged space. And they can flood back through this protein, which is called ATP synthase, that has a hole that can fit protons. And as they flood back through, this acts like turbines in a dam. So the hydrogens or the protons can only come down through this direction. And so this turns a little crank that can make ADP turn into ATP when we have extra phosphate around. And so this creates a whole ton of energy really quickly. Okay, so I told you that fats, proteins, and carbohydrates could all feed into cellular respiration. And so here's where we can do it. Our carbohydrates are really easy. These all have long strings of glucose molecules, which can just be cleaved apart into individual glucose molecules. They can go straight into glycolysis and go through the cellular respiration process as normal. Our fats here can be cleaved into fatty acids, which are very similar or identical to pyruvic acid, which was created at the end of glycolysis. So our fats can be fed right through here into our citric acid cycle. So this is why keto diets don't result in starvation, right? Because there's still fat in keto diets, and fat is a very energy-dense source of food. And then our proteins over here, beans, eggs, meat, and fish, can be broken into amino acids, which can go into either the end of glycolysis or into the citric acid cycle, and then go through cellular respiration like normal. So there you go. Okay, so the word metabolism refers to all the chemical reactions in your body that are occurring. How fast they occur, how slow they occur, is often what we describe when we say metabolism. But ATP, that is produced by cellular respiration, powers nearly all of life's processes and is a crucial part of your metabolism. Okay, so if you haven't watched this, I would love for you to click back into your modules and watch this YouTube video that goes through a more detailed description of cellular respiration. And with that, thank you, and I will see you in the next lecture.